The sky over the world of Viridia Secundus was not weeping rain, but fire. For the 114th Cadian Regiment, it was another day in the grim darkness of the 41st Millennium. For something sealed deep beneath the planet's crust, the psychic shockwave of a daemonic incursion was not an end, but an alarm clock. The trench was a soup of mud, blood, and promethium-stained water. Sergeant Kalen of the 114th Cadians slammed a fresh power cell into his lasgun. The act wrote, meaningless. They had been holding the line against the Word-Bearer's traitor legion for 3 weeks. The line was now a noose. "They're breaking through the western redoubt," a voxcaster crackled, the voice laced with static and panic. Kalen looked at the faces of his squad. Young Lissa, her face smeared with grime. The veteran Auric, his bionic eye whirring uselessly after a psychic blast. A dozen others, all with the same hollow look. They were dead. They just hadn't stopped moving yet. The ground trembled, not from shelling, but from something deeper. A low, resonant thrum that vibrated in their bones. The air grew cold, and the ever-present whispers of the warp seemed to falter, replaced by a profound, predatory silence. Then, from a collapsed subterranean archaeotech vault the traitors had obliterated days ago, a figure emerged. He was tall, wrapped in a long, crimson coat that seemed to drink the weak light. His hair was as pale as a corpse, and his eyes were hidden behind circular spectacles that glinted with an unnatural red. He moved with an impossible grace, his boots not sinking into the muck. "Identify yourself," Kalen barked, his lasgun raised, though every instinct screamed that it was useless. The figure stopped, a slow, mocking smile spreading across his face. "So loud," he murmured, his voice a silken baritone that cut through the battlefield's din. "All this noise, it's invigorating." He tilted his head, looking past the sergeant at the hulking forms of the word-bearers advancing in the distance. "New playmates, how kind of you to throw a welcome party." This was no rescue. This was the arrival of a predator who considered the daemons and traitors on the field his personal buffet. Before Kalen could speak, a hulking Chaos Space Marine, its armor etched with runes of torment, leveled a heavy bolter. "A ghost from the grave? Die again, fool." The figure, Alucard, simply laughed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated madness. The bolter shells ripped towards him, and he didn't dodge. They tore through his coat, his torso, exploding out his back in gory chunks. He staggered, looked down at the gaping holes in his chest, and then his head snapped up, his grin wider, maniacal. "Is that all?" he whispered. The wounds sealed in an instant, black and red tendrils of darkness stitching him back together. The Chaos Marine froze, its fanatical certainty broken. Alucard raised a gloved hand. "I am the bird of Hermes, the hound of hells. Release. Restraint. Level 0. The world dissolved into shadows. From the darkness around Alucard erupted a tidal wave of crimson eyes and gnashing teeth. Not demons, but something older, hungrier, a legion of the damned given form. They swarmed the Chaos Marine, dragging the 8-foot-tall transhuman monster to the ground, his screams of rage turning to shrieks of agony before being silenced completely. The Cadian squad watched, paralyzed with a terror that eclipsed their fear of chaos. They had just witnessed something that defied the Imperial truth, the nature of the warp, and sanity itself. Alucard turned back to the stunned Cadians. "Now," he said, as if he had just swatted a fly, "you will be my guides. This world has changed since I was last awake." Through fractured explanations, Kalen learned that Alucard was not of this universe. He was a relic, sealed away millennia ago in a pocket dimension by a long-dead race of Xenos who feared his nature. The cataclysmic warp energy of the Word-Bearer's invasion had torn that prison open. Desperate, seeing no other path to survival for his squad, Kalen agreed to a pact. They would guide him, and he would play with their enemies. This bond was sealed not with a handshake, but when Alucard, with a casual gesture, stopped the bleeding from a gut wound on young trooper Lissa. The act was effortless, almost dismissive, but it saved her life. Their first test came at the gallows span, a vital bridge across a chasm of fire. A squad of bloodletters, led by a hulking bloodthirster, was butchering the Imperial defenders. "Stay here," Alucard said, his grin returning. "The adults are going to play." He didn't walk towards the daemons. He flowed, a river of shadow and crimson. The bloodletters turned their hellblades on him, but their weapons passed through him as if he were smoke. He grabbed one by the horn, his form solidifying. "You are not real," he whispered to the shrieking daemon. "You are a thought, a feeling, and I consume everything." He opened his mouth, and the bloodletter dissolved into a stream of crimson energy, sucked into the abyss of his being. The other demons wavered, their immaterial forms feeling a fear they had only ever inflicted. The bloodthirster charged, its axe roaring with hellfire. Alucard met its charge, not with a weapon, but with an outstretched hand. Shadows erupted from his palm, forming into massive, spectral jaws that clamped down on the greater daemon. There was a sound of tearing reality, a psychic scream that echoed in the minds of every soldier present, and then silence. The bloodthirster was gone, absorbed. Alucard stood alone on the bridge, his form flickering with a bloody, internal light. He turned to Kalen's squad, his smile now holding a hint of genuine satisfaction. The main course was fulfilling, but the appetizer is still running. The salvation of the gallows span did not go unnoticed. The victory was too strange, the reports from the surviving guardsmen too heretical. A ship, the Purgatus Sanctus, descended from the ash clouds. Inquisitor Caleb Varus of the Ordo Malleus had arrived. He was a severe man, his face a roadmap of scars and faith. He immediately seized command and summoned Sergeant Kalen. "You consorted with a Xenos wraith," Varus stated, his voice cold as space. "You allowed it to consume the servants of the dark gods. You have traded one damnation for another. Your soul, and the souls of your squad, are forfeit." Kalen stood his ground, the image of Alucard saving Lissa, saving them all at the bridge, burning in his mind. "It saved us, my lord. It fights the archenemy. Is that not a weapon we should use?" "Heresy!" Varus slammed his fist on the table. "There is no using such things. There is only purgation. You will lead my stormtroopers to its lair. You will be the bait in its damnation." As Kalen was marched out, he saw Alucard leaning against a ruined wall, observing the stormtroopers with amusement. He had heard everything. "The zealot wishes to play a game of cat and mouse," Alucard mused. "How quaint. I have not been the mouse in a very, very long time." Varus's plan was simple and brutal. Using Kalen's squad as a psychic beacon tied to Alucard through their pact, he would lure the vampire into a pre-prepared sanctum, a circle of warding etched with hexagrammic wards and powered by a choir of sanctioned psychers. Alucard walked into the trap willingly, laughing as the psychers began their chant. The air shimmered, the wards glowed with blinding white light. Alucard convulsed, his form distorting. "You see, abomination?" Varus roared. "The power of the God Emperor is absolute. You will be unmade." But Alucard did not unmade. Instead, he began to change. The wards weren't destroying him. They were forcing him to shed his human shell. The shadows in the room congealed, the temperature plummeted, and the psychers began to scream, blood leaking from their eyes and noses. You think your light can banish me? A voice boomed, not from Alucard, but from the shadows themselves. I am not of your warp. I am the darkness that was here before the first star was lit. I am the end that came before the beginning. His restraint shattered. Alucard's true form erupted, a colossal, shifting mass of darkness, eyes and teeth, a Lovecraftian horror that blotted out the sky above the sanctum. It was a sight that shattered the minds of half the stormtroopers. Inquisitor Varus fell to his knees, his faith not broken, but utterly overwhelmed. This was no daemon. This was something the Codex Daemonica had no record of. The shadow beast turned its countless eyes towards the main word-bearer's stronghold, where a massive ritual was nearing completion. A warp rift tearing open to admit a legion of daemons. And it was hungry. The shadow that was Alucard fell upon the traitor forces like a falling moon. Where it passed, word-bearers and daemons alike were simply erased from existence, consumed into the endless void of his being. The nascent demon prince at the ritual's heart, a being of immense power, was grabbed by shadowy tendrils and dragged, shrieking, into the abyss. The warp rift shuddered and collapsed without its anchor. In less than an hour, the war for Viridia Secundus was over. As the sun broke through the ash-choked sky for the first time in months, the shadow receded, coalescing back into the form of the man in the red coat. He stood amidst the ruins of the traitor army, whole and unblemished. He walked back to the sanctum, where a terrified but resolute Sergeant Kalen stood over the stunned form of Inquisitor Varus. Alucard looked at Varus, then at Kalen. "You see, Inquisitor," he said, his voice quiet once more. "You fight for a throne of bones and a corpse god who does not answer. They," he gestured to Kalen's squad, "fight for the person next to them, a far more potent fuel than your blind faith. It is a will to live I have not seen in ages. It is interesting." At Kalen one last time. "Our deal is done, little hunter. Your flock is safe." His form began to dissolve into a flock of shadowy bats. "This universe is so much bigger, so much louder than I imagined. So many more monsters to play with." As the bats scattered into the winds, a single crimson flower, impossibly pristine, landed at Kalen's feet. Inquisitor Caleb Varus filed a report of such staggering heresy and contradiction that it was sealed with the highest level of clearance. It spoke of an anomaly Omicron 7, an entity that was neither demon nor Xenos, that had saved a world while defying all imperial logic. The Ordo Malleus now had a new, terrifying, and unclassifiable file. The hunt was not over, but the hunters were now afraid. Sergeant Kalen and his squad were reassigned to a newly formed, highly secretive regiment, the Viridian Ghosts, under the watchful eye of an inquisitor who now questioned everything he knew. They were both heroes and heretics, forever bound by the pact that saved them. And somewhere, in the void between stars, a being of infinite darkness and hunger flew. He had found a universe where the war never ended, the blood never stopped flowing, and the monsters were legion. For Alucard, the no-life king, who had spent centuries longing for a worthy death, he had instead found the one place that could truly be called home. The great galactic game had just acquired a new, unstoppable player. The crimson flower left by Alucard did not wither. Sergeant Kalen, now captain of the Viridian Ghosts, kept it pressed inside his dog-eared copy of the uplifting primer. It was a cold, perfect thing, a secret heresy that felt more real than the prayers he now mumbled by rote. It was also a beacon. 6 months after Viridia Secundus, the Ghosts were deployed to the hive world of Solus 4, a planet dying not from invasion, but from within. A genestealer cult, the Twisted Helix, had festered in the lower hives for generations. The uprising was swift, brutal, and terrifyingly coordinated. The Imperial forces were being outmaneuvered at every turn, their command structure unraveling as hidden cultists within their own ranks sabotaged communications and assassinated officers. Kaelin's ghosts were sent to secure the primary plasma conduit in Hive Secundus, the city's beating heart. It was a suicide mission. The cult knew they were coming. They're everywhere, Lissa whispered over the squad vox, her voice tight with fear. They were pinned down in a refinery complex, ambushed from vents, gangways, and even from beneath grating floors. The four-armed aberrants were tearing through their front line with hydraulic claws. Auric fired his plasma gun, searing a hole through a charging hybrid. They knew our route, Sergeant. It's a fragging trap. Kaelin knew he was right. This was more than an ambush. It was a perfectly laid snare. As a pure-strain genestealer, a nightmare of chitinous flesh and rending claws, dropped from the ceiling directly towards him, Kaelin did the only thing he could think of. He didn't pray to the God Emperor. He reached into his webbing, touching the cold, waxy petal of the crimson flower. "We need you." The response was not salvation, but a shift in the very atmosphere. The shadows in the refinery, already deep, became absolute. The chittering of the cult, the roar of gunfire, the screams of the dying, all were swallowed by a sudden, profound silence. The pure-strain genestealer, mid-leap, was snatched from the air by a tendril of living darkness and vanished without a sound. From the deepest shadow, a familiar, silken voice echoed, "You called, little hunter." And here I was, enjoying the symphony of corruption this world is broadcasting. It has a distinct flavor. Alucard stood there, as if he had been part of the scenery all along. He looked at the battling cultists with academic curiosity. A hive mind? How fascinating. A collective consciousness. A single, delicious soul spread across thousands of bodies. He didn't attack the cultists. He simply raised a hand, and one of the hybrid cultists, a foreman with a telltale bulbous skull, froze. His eyes widened in a terror that was not his own. It was the terror of the Patriarch. The broodmind's core, seeing a predator it could not comprehend. "Found you," Alucard whispered with a predatory smile. The genestealer cult's coordination shattered. Hybrids began firing wildly, not at the Imperials, but at shadows. Aberrants turned on each other. The psychic harmony that guided them was being violently disrupted, a dissonant scream of primal fear injected directly into their shared psyche. Alucard walked through the chaos, untouchable. He wasn't consuming them physically, not yet. He was tasting their connection, savoring the panic of the hive mind as it tried to understand an enemy that attacked its very existence. Inquisitor Varus, monitoring the battle from orbit aboard the Purgatus Sanctus, saw the data streams go haywire. The cult's movements, once a predictable, deadly algorithm, dissolved into chaos. And at the epicenter of the disruption was a massive, anomalous energy signature he had coded Omicron 7. "He's here," Varus muttered, his scarred face grim. He turned to his most trusted interrogator, a severe woman named Valeria. "The ghosts have activated the anomaly. It is interacting with the Xenos psyche. This is an unprecedented opportunity and an unimaginable risk." On the ground, Kaelin fought his way to Alucard. "What are you doing?" "They're breaking." "Breaking?" "No," Alucard corrected, not taking his eyes off a twitching hybrid. "I am having a conversation. I am telling the big one, the Patriarch, in the depths below, a simple truth. I see it, and I am coming for it." A psychic shockwave erupted from the lower hive, a blast of pure, undiluted terror and rage from the Patriarch that knocked every psyker on the planet to their knees. The cultists, in response, fell into a frenzied, desperate rush, all swarming towards Alucard, a biological immune system trying to reject a virus. Alucard finally laughed, the sound echoing madly. Now the game begins. Release, restraint, level 1. The mission changed. No longer was it about securing a conduit. Alucard was a bloodhound, and the scent of the Patriarch's unique soul was his trail. He moved deeper into the underhive, a tide of shadows and death, with Kalen and the ghosts fighting desperately to keep up, to be his guides as per their pact. The corridors of the underhive had been transformed into a biological nightmare, walls pulsed with organic matter, glistening with slime, the very air thick with the smell of pheromones and decay. It was a labyrinth designed to protect its heart, and Alucard reveled in it. He was not a soldier following a map, he was a force of nature following a current. He would stop, sometimes, to admire a particularly grotesque spawning pool, or to sample a cultist magus, absorbing not just its body but its knowledge, its memories, its connection to the whole. Kalen watched in horror as Alucard would sometimes speak in the voices of the consumed, reciting cult litanies or whispering the names of hidden cult cells on other worlds. He was not just killing the cult, he was devouring its entire history, its knowledge, its very essence. He's learning everything, Lissa said, her voice trembling. He'll know all their secrets, all their plans across the sector. Auric grunted, his bionic eye scanning the throbbing walls. Aye. And then what does he do with that information? The suspense was no longer about survival against the cult. It was about what would be left when Alucard was done. Would he save Solus IV only to become an infinitely more knowledgeable and terrifying threat? They reached the inner sanctum, a vast, cathedral-like space that had once been a reactor core, now transformed into a grotesque throne room. And there, upon a throne of fused bodies and scrap metal, sat the Patriarch. It was a monstrous size, a thing of ancient, vile intelligence and immense psychic power. Its presence was a physical weight, and its four arms ended in claws that could shred adamantium. Its psychic aura, a palpable field of domination, pressed down on the ghosts, threatening to shatter their minds. But its multifaceted eyes were not on the Imperial soldiers. They were fixed on Alucard, and in them was a terror that transcended the biological. It saw what Alucard truly was. Not a man, not a daemon, but a void, an end. The Patriarch unleashed its full psychic might, a lance of pure mental energy designed to annihilate any sentient mind. Alucard caught it. He didn't deflect it. He opened his being and let the psychic blast pour into him. His form flickered, his shadow stretching and distorting, but his grin never wavered. The psychic power, the very consciousness of the Patriarch, was being drained, siphoned away like water into desert sand. You are nothing. The Patriarch's thought voice echoed, fraying at the edges. I am the cup that runneth over. Alucard's voice boomed in the minds of all present, 1,000 voices speaking as one. I am the destination of all things. Your children, your thoughts, your future are all mine. The shadows in the room converged on the Patriarch. There was no grand physical struggle. The ancient Xenos horror, the master of an entire planet's subversion, was simply enveloped. Its psychic scream was cut short, its physical form dissolving into the darkness. The hive mind, a psychic network spanning millions, simply went silent. The organic pulsation of the walls ceased. The slime dried up instantly. The cultists throughout the hive stopped moving, their connection severed, their purpose extinguished. In the sudden, deafening silence, Alucard stood alone in the center of the chamber. He turned to Kalen, and for a fleeting moment, his eyes behind his glasses were not mocking, but vast and ancient, holding the... In the sudden, deafening silence, Alucard stood alone in the center of the chamber. He turned to Kalen, and for a fleeting moment, his eyes behind his glasses were not mocking, but vast and ancient, holding the stolen knowledge of a star-faring plague. The little minds are quiet, he said. his voice a normal whisper once more. "This world is saved, little hunter. But the big ones, the gods in the Sea of Souls." He turned to Interrogator Valeria, his face ashen. "Dispatch the message. Code Omicron 7 is active, contained, and has demonstrated strategic utility against Xenos threats. But also dispatch a second message. My eyes only to the Ordo Malleus High Command." He paused, the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. "The abyss we have unleashed now hunts other monsters. We must pray it never decides it is hungry enough to turn around." The victory on Solus IV was Pyrrhic and hollow. The hive cities stood, but they were filled with catatonic cultists, their wills extinguished with the Patriarch's death. The silence in the lower levels was not peaceful. It was the silence of a graveyard where the corpses were still breathing. The chitinous claw of the Patriarch, left by Alucard, seemed to pulse with a faint, residual malice in Kaelin's quarters, a cold piece of nightmare that refused to fade. Captain Kaelin and his Viridian ghosts were hailed as heroes, but the accolades felt like ashes in their mouths. They had been instruments of a force that treated a Genestealer broodmind as a light snack. The true horror was not what they had fought, but what they had enabled. Their next deployment was to the shrine world of Sanctus Thule, a place of immense spiritual significance, now besieged by a different kind of foe. The reports were fragmented, bizarre. There were no enemy troop movements, no orbital bombardments. Instead, the population was simply vanishing. Priests spoke of the weeping in the walls and the shadows that drink prayer. The Astra Militarum regiments sent to investigate had ceased all communication. As their transport ship, the Righteous Fury, translated from the warp into the Sanctus Thule system, the first thing they noticed was the silence on the Vox. No astropathic choir greetings, no orbital control hails, just static. Then, a single, strained whisper cut through the noise, a voice from the planet's surface that should have been impossible to hear. "The blood is old here. It sings to me." It was Alucard's voice. The sky over the primary landing zone was a bruised purple. The air was cold and carried a metallic, coppery taste, like old blood and ozone. The grand cathedrals and pilgrim hospices of Sanctus Thule stood pristine and untouched, yet utterly devoid of life. No birds, no insects, no wind. It was a world preserved in a moment of terror. They found the 82nd Valhallan Regiment in the Grand Plaza before the Cathedral of St. Celestine. They were not dead. They were frozen in place, mid-action, a soldier forever aiming his last gun, a commissar with his mouth open in a silent order, a tech priest bent over a malfunctioning voxcaster. Their bodies were intact, but their eyes were gone, replaced by smooth, unbroken skin. A fine, rust-colored dust coated them, leaching the color from their uniforms and flesh. "Throne of Earth," Lissa breathed, her hand over her mouth. "What happened to them?" Oryx scanned the area with his auspex. No life signs, no energy readings. "It's like time just stopped for them, but it's still moving for us." Kaelin approached one of the statuesque soldiers. As his shadow fell upon it, the Valhallan's form crumbled, not into bone and dust, but into a fine, red powder that smelled of salt and despair. The rust-colored dust swirled for a moment, then settled. From the shadows of the cathedral's great doorway, a familiar figure emerged. Alucard was not smiling. His face was a mask of grim fascination. He held up a hand, catching some of the drifting red dust. "They are not dead, little hunter," Alucard said, his voice low and serious. "Not in the way you understand. Their time, their souls, their very stories have been consumed, eaten away, This is not the work of your petty chaos gods. This is something far older. A hunger that does not feast on flesh, but on existence itself. He looked at Kaelin, and for the first time, Kaelin saw something in Alucard's eyes that chilled him more than any mockery or madness. A spark of recognition, of a fellow predator. They are my competition. Driven by a dread that now had a name, the ghosts pressed deeper into the cathedral city. Alucard walked among them, no longer a detached player, but a hunter on a fresh trail. The horror escalated. They began to hear it, a faint, collective weeping that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. It was the sound of 1,000,000,000 lost prayers, the echoes of souls being slowly unmade. The shadows in the buildings began to move against the non-existent wind, twitching and elongating in ways that hurt the mind to observe. In a Medicae hospice, they found the source of the weeping. The patients and staff were still in their beds and at their stations, but they were translucent, like fading photographs. Their mouths were open in silent screams, and from them poured not sound, but the visible, shimmering essence of their memories and emotions, a silver mist that was siphoned into the walls, drawn towards some central, hungry point. One of the ghosts, a young trooper named Evran, brushed against a fading nurse. Her form dissolved into the red dust, and her final, terrified memory imprinted itself directly into his mind. Evran began to shriek, clawing at his own eyes. "The stone! The stone is alive! It's drinking us!" Alucard was at his side in an instant. He didn't console him. He placed a hand on Evran's head, and the trooper's screams were cut short as Alucard absorbed the memory and the madness that came with it. "Fascinating," Alucard murmured, licking his lips. "It doesn't just consume, it savors. It delights in the terror. It is an artist." He turned to Kaelin, his grin returning, but now it was a ghastly, predatory thing. "This is not a war for you to fight, little hunter. This is a tasting menu, and I believe the main course is being served in the catacombs below." The descent into the catacombs beneath the cathedral was a journey into a living nightmare. The stone walls were no longer stone, but a porous, fleshy substance that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat. The air grew thick with the psychic residue of consumed souls, a cacophony of silent screams that pressed against their minds. The red dust was everywhere, piling up like blasphemous snow. At the center of the catacombs, they found it. The entity had no true form. It was a vortex of swirling, rust-colored energy, anchored to the planet by a nexus of pulsating, vein-like roots that burrowed into the bedrock. Within the vortex, they could see fleeting, agonized faces, the 1,000,000,000 souls of Sanctus Thule being slowly unraveled into nothingness. This was the shadow that drinks prayer, a Cetan shard, not of the Necrontyr, but something far more ancient and ravenous, a psychophage, a devourer of sentient thought. It had been slumbering beneath this shrine world for millennia, gorging on the faint psychic emanations of faith. The recent surge of war and terror in the galaxy had finally awakened it to full, ravenous consciousness. Alucard stared into the vortex, and the vortex seemed to stare back. The weeping in the walls rose to a deafening psychic wail. Another hunger. A thought voice echoed, dry and vast as a desert. "You feed on blood and soul. I feed on the concept of self. You are a glutton. I am a purification." Alucard laughed, a raw, unfiltered sound of utter madness and joy. He spread his arms wide, his coat flaring like wings of blood. "You are a thief," he roared back, his voice now the chorus of 1,000,000 lost souls he had consumed. "You steal what is rightfully mine, their fear, their pain, their delicious, mortal despair. I will not share this playground with you." He turned to Kalen and the ghosts, his eyes burning with infernal light. "Run. This is not a battle for mortal eyes. To witness this is to have your sanity unravel." As the ghosts fled back towards the surface, the last thing Kalen saw was Alucard's human form dissolving, not into bats, but into an equally vast and terrifying counter-vortex of absolute darkness, a void of screaming faces and crimson eyes, as he launched himself at the soul-devouring entity. The two primordial hungers collided, not with a sound, but with a silent, reality-rending tear in the fabric of existence. The horror was no longer about daemons or Xenos. It was about witnessing the true, terrifying ecology of the cosmos, where beings like Alucard were the apex predators, and the souls of humanity were merely the currency in their eternal, monstrous war. He embraced it. He was chaos and will, the unyielding "I am" against the psychophage's whispering, "You are not. You are a collection of stolen moments." The psychophage's thought voice rasped, trying to logic him out of existence. "I am a symphony." Alucard's voice thundered back, a chorus of a billion screams given purpose. "And you are a single, monotonous note. I will add you to my collection." Where the psychophage consumed, Alucard assimilated. He did not simply resist the unraveling, he drank the unraveler. The rust-colored energy of the psychophage was drawn into the black hole of Alucard's being. "This is illogical." "No," Alucard corrected, his presence swelling, growing denser, darker, more absolute. "This is fun." With a final, silent, psychic detonation that turned the stone of the catacombs to glass, the psychophage was gone. Consumed, its vast, silent hunger was now just another facet of Alucard's cacophonous, eternal one, and his reign of terror had not even begun. "Okay,